All right, welcome to The Explainer. So, have you ever been in a class or read an article about economics and thought to yourself, wait, that can't be right? Something that just completely flies in the face of common sense? Well, today, we're going to get into exactly that. We're going to figure out why economics, this big study of our choices and resources, can feel so incredibly counterintuitive sometimes.
Let's just dive right in with a classic example that trips up almost everyone. It's this idea of a business making zero economic profit. Now, when I first heard that, I was like, zero profit? No profit? Then why on earth would anyone even go into business? I mean, it sounds like you're just spinning your wheels, right? A total disaster. But you got to stick with me on this one, because in the weird and wonderful world of economics, this thing that sounds awful is actually a sign that a business is doing just fine.
See, that whole zero profit thing? It's the perfect example of this huge gap between what we see in our everyday lives and what economic theory tells us. It honestly feels like economists are living in a different reality, One where the rules are just different, and they often clash head-on with what we call simple common sense.
Or think about something as basic as a price tag on a shirt. You and I, we look at that and think, okay, pretty simple. The shop owner decided to charge that much. But an economist, they'd look at it and go, well, not really. They would tell you that the price isn't set by one person at all, but by these huge invisible forces of supply and demand in the market. And it's exactly this kind of conflict between what we see with our own eyes and what the theory tells us that makes so much of economics feel just wrong.
So to try and bridge that gap, to make sense of it all, we really have to go back to the beginning, back to square one. We need to look at the single fundamental problem that the entire field of economics is built on. I promise, once you get this one core idea, everything else starts to click into place.
And here it is, the whole thing in a nutshell. Economics, it's not actually about money. I know, weird, right? It's really the science of choice. It's all about studying how we humans behave when we have all these things we want. I mean, our wants are basically unlimited, but the resources to get them are, well, they're limited. To put it simply, it's about how we make decisions when we know we just can't have it all.
And that brings us to the most important word in all of economics, scarcity. Seriously, every single economic puzzle, every complex theory, every political debate, you can trace it all back to this one simple but super powerful idea. There just isn't enough of everything for everyone to have it for free. And that one simple fact forces every single one of us, you, me, big companies, even entire governments, to make some really tough choices.
And those choices? They basically boil down to three fundamental questions that every single society, no matter where or when, has to answer. Number one, with our limited time, money, and materials, what are we even going to make? Number two, how are we going to make it? And number three, once it's made, who gets it? It doesn't matter if you're talking about the Roman Empire or modern-day Silicon Valley, every single economy is wrestling with these exact same three questions.
Okay, so if we're constantly forced to make these big choices, how do we know if we're making good ones? How do we actually measure the trade-offs? Well, that is where statistics comes into play. You can think of statistics as the official language of economics. It's the tool they use to take all these complicated choices and ideas and turn them into cold, hard, measurable data.
Now here's a cool little detail you might not know. The word statistics actually has two totally different meanings. So when we use it in the plural sense, we're talking about the data itself, the actual numerical facts and figures. But when we use it in the singular sense, as in statistics as a science, we're talking about the whole method, the science of collecting, organizing, and analyzing all that data.
So, let's break that down. You can think of statistics, plural, as just the raw numbers. Stuff like population figures for a city, average income levels, how many cars were sold last quarter, that kind of thing.
But, and this is super important, not all data gets to be called statistics. A single, random number floating by itself is pretty much meaningless. For a piece of data to become a statistic, it has to be part of a bigger, organized picture.
Right, so for data to actually become useful statistics, a few things need to happen. It can't be just one number. It has to be a collection of facts. It needs to be gathered in a systematic way and for a specific, predetermined reason. But here's the most important part. The numbers have to be placed in relation to each other so you can compare them. A single data point? That's like a whisper. But when you can compare it to another data point, now you've got a story. Now you've got something to talk about.
Okay, quick recap. We've got our fundamental problem, which is scarcity, and we've got our language for measuring it, which is statistics. So now, let's put those two pieces together and really dig into why our gut feelings about economics can lead us so far off track.
Honestly, one of the biggest reasons for all this confusion is just language. It sounds simple, but economists have this habit of taking normal, everyday words that we all use and giving them these super specific technical meanings. And those meanings are often completely different from how we use the words in a regular conversation. It's almost like they're speaking their own special dialect of English.
Let's go back to our keyword, scarcity. For most of us, when we hear scarce, we think of something that's rare, right? Like a one-of-a-kind collectible or vintage comic book. But for an economist, a brand new iPhone, with millions of them out there, is also considered scarce. And you might be thinking, how is that possible? Well, think about it. If they were giving iPhones away for free, would there be enough for everyone who wanted one? No way. The line would stretch for miles. Our wants for iPhones are greater than the available supply. That's economic scarcity.
And this brings us full circle, right back to that first puzzle about profit. In accounting, it's pretty straightforward. You take your revenue and subtract your expenses. Boom, profit. But for an economist, it's more complicated. They subtract the expenses, sure, but they also subtract something invisible called opportunity cost. And what's that? It's the value of the next best thing the business owner gave up. For example, it's the salary they could be earning at a different job instead of running this particular business.
So, when an economist says a business is making zero economic profit, they're not saying the owner is walking away with nothing. Not at all. They're saying the business is earning just enough money to cover all the regular bills plus that opportunity cost we just talked about, like paying the owner a competitive salary. In other words, the business is perfectly stable, it's healthy, and it's doing exactly well enough to justify its existence. It's actually a sign of success.
And profit isn't the only word that messes with our heads. Check this out. A study looked at another concept called allocative efficiency. And most students, when asked what it meant, said it was either about a company making the most profit possible or about making sure everyone gets an equal slice of the pie. But the actual economic definition is neither of those. It's about maximizing the total benefit to all of society. That's the combined value to both the people buying and the people selling. The goal is to make the economic pie as big as it can possibly be, not to worry about how it gets sliced up.
And get this is the really shocking part of that study. For more than 2/3 of the students, these incorrect, common-sense ideas were still stuck in their heads even after they had taken a full year of economics classes. That just goes to show you how powerful our everyday intuition is, and how incredibly hard it can be to unlearn those initial assumptions.
So what does this all tell us? It tells us that learning economics isn't really about memorizing a bunch of definitions from a textbook. It's much deeper than that. It's about adopting a completely new framework, a new way of looking at the world. It's about learning to think like an economist.
And that means getting comfortable with some of their tools and phrases, like this Latin one you hear all the time, ceteris paribus. All it means is all other things being equal. It's a mental trick. So if you want to figure out how a price change affects sales, you have to pretend that nothing else in the world is changing at that exact moment. Not people's incomes, not the weather, not a competitor's new ad campaign. It's a way to isolate just one single factor so you can see its true effect.
And once you get the hang of it, this economic way of thinking is an incredibly powerful lens. It really forces you to see the world around you as just a constant series of choices, costs, and benefits. And it's a way to understand so much more than just business and markets. It applies to almost every decision, big or small, that we make in our lives.
Because once you start to understand this way of thinking, you begin to see the hidden trade-offs in everything. You start to question the things you've always just accepted as true. So I'll leave you with this to chew on. After all this, what's the first common sense belief you have that you're going to start questioning? What are you going to look at a little differently now?